January 14th, 2:17 a.m., minus 28 degrees, and the wind chill dropping fast enough to kill a man in under 4 hours. They threw him out anyway. No shelter, no food, no second chance, just a broken Navy SEAL and his white German Shepherd left to disappear in a Montana blizzard like they never existed. But what no one expected was the dog refusing to walk towards safety. Instead, dragging him deeper into the storm, toward a place no map showed, a place buried under decades of snow and silence. Because while the man had already lost everything, his home, his brother, his reason to keep going, the dog sensed something else beneath the ice, something alive, something hidden. And as the storm closed in and the temperature kept falling, one question became impossible to ignore. What was buried under that mountain? And why did the entire town want him dead before he could find it? They didn't just turn him away. They made sure he wouldn't come back, and Nathan Cole understood that the moment the last door slammed behind him, the moment the faint yellow light from the town's only open bar disappeared into the storm, swallowed whole by snow and darkness, leaving nothing but the sound of wind tearing through the empty street and the slow, deliberate footsteps of a man who had once survived war zones now being erased by something far quieter, far colder. Because this wasn't a battlefield, there were no enemies to see, no orders to follow, just a silent agreement between the people inside those warm buildings that he didn't belong here, that whatever he carried with him, grief, history, or something darker, was not their problem, and so they sent him out into a storm that didn't forgive mistakes, didn't care about past service, didn't care about anything except how long it would take for his body to stop moving. Atlas walked beside him, not behind, not ahead, but exactly level, his thick white fur already coated with ice particles that clung to him like the storm itself was trying to claim him. But his posture never changed, his head steady, eyes scanning through the shifting darkness with a kind of calm that didn't match the chaos around them. And Nathan noticed it even through the numbness starting to creep into his hands. Because dogs didn't ignore danger like that unless something else mattered. More, unless instinct was telling them that survival wasn't in the direction most people would choose. Nathan pulled his collar tighter, the fabric stiff with cold, his breath shallow now, controlled, the way it had been trained to stay under pressure. But this wasn't pressure like combat, this was slower, quieter, a creeping kind of threat that didn't explode but instead wrapped itself around you piece by piece until you stopped noticing the difference between fighting and giving in, and for a moment, just a moment. He wondered if this was how it ended, not with noise or chaos, but with silence. And snow covering everything he had ever been. 3 months ago, he had stood in a cemetery watching the last person who knew him before the war disappear into the ground, and even then, even surrounded by people speaking in soft voices, offering condolences they didn't understand, he had already felt this coming, this empty stretch of existence where nothing anchored him anymore, where waking up felt like an obligation instead of a choice. And when his brother's coffin was lowered beneath the frozen earth, something inside Nathan had gone. With it, something he hadn't been able to retrieve no matter how far he walked, or how long he stayed awake trying to remember who he used to be before everything broke. The town had seen it the moment he arrived, the way he moved, the way he didn't look at people unless he had to, the way Atlas stayed close but alert, and they had judged him quickly, quietly, deciding that whatever he was, it wasn't something they wanted near them. And Evelyn Shaw had made that decision final without ever raising her voice, standing behind the bar with that calm, controlled expression. Her gray eyes measuring him like a problem already solved, and when she told him there were no rooms, no space, no reason for him to stay, Nathan had recognized something in her tone that went beyond simple rejection, something colder, something deliberate. Now, out in the storm, that feeling returned, stronger, sharper. Because this didn't feel like chance, didn't feel like a town protecting itself from a stranger, it felt like something else, something deeper, as if they hadn't just pushed him away, they had pushed him in a specific direction. Atlas stopped. The leash pulled slightly as the dog planted his paws into the snow, muscles tightening beneath his coat, ears forward, eyes locked on something ahead that Nathan couldn't see through the blowing snow, and for a second, irritation flickered through him. The kind that came from exhaustion more than anger, because stopping meant losing heat, losing momentum, losing whatever small chance he had of finding shelter before his body gave out completely. "Not now!" Nathan muttered, voice rough, barely audible. But Atlas didn't move. Instead, he shifted slightly, angling his body toward the tree line where the mountain rose in shadow behind the storm, a place darker than the rest, less defined, like the snow didn't settle there the same way, and then, without hesitation, he stepped forward. Not toward the road, not toward the distant lights of the town that had already rejected them, but toward the mountain. Nathan hesitated. Every instinct told him to go the other way, to follow the road, to find something, anything that resembled safety. But there was something about the way Atlas moved that cut through that logic, something steady and certain, the same kind of certainty he had seen in the dog during missions when hesitation meant death, when second-guessing instinct got people killed, and even now, standing on the edge of freezing to death, that memory mattered. "All right." He exhaled, more to himself than the dog, and followed. The snow deepened almost immediately, swallowing his boots with each step, the terrain uneven, hidden beneath layers that shifted unpredictably, forcing him to slow down, to focus, to fight for every inch forward while the wind pushed back harder with each passing minute, and still Atlas moved without hesitation, cutting through the storm with purpose, his movements precise, controlled. As if he wasn't searching but tracking something that had already been found. Minutes blurred into something longer, harder to measure, time stretching under the weight of cold and effort, and Nathan could feel his body starting to fail, the numbness spreading, the subtle loss of coordination that came before things got worse, much worse, and just as the thought crossed his mind that he might not make it much further, Atlas stopped again. This time, he didn't just stand. He began to dig. Snow sprayed outward in sharp bursts as his paws tore through the surface, not frantic, not random, but focused, deliberate, each movement carving deeper into the drift beneath him, and Nathan felt something shift inside him, something that cut through the exhaustion and forced him forward, dropping to his knees beside the dog, hands already moving, pushing snow aside despite the burn of cold biting into his skin. "What is it?" he breathed. Atlas didn't look up. He kept digging. And then Nathan felt it. Not snow. Not earth. Something solid. Something wrong. His fingers brushed against metal, cold and smooth beneath the ice, edges too clean, too precise to belong in a place like this, and for a moment, the storm seemed to fade, replaced by something sharper, something more dangerous than the cold, because this wasn't random, this wasn't nature, this was something built, something hidden, something buried on purpose. He cleared more snow, revealing the outline of a hatch, old but intact, sealed beneath layers meant to erase it from the world, and as he stared at it, breath slowing despite the freezing air, one thought rose above everything else. This is why they didn't want me here. Atlas stepped back slightly, watching him, waiting, and for the first time since the storm began, Nathan felt something other than numbness, something close to awareness, to purpose, because whatever this was, it wasn't just shelter. It was a secret. And secrets like this got people killed. The wind howled louder, the temperature dropping further, but none of it mattered now, because somewhere beneath his hands, beneath the snow and the metal and the silence of decades, something waited. And as Nathan reached for the hatch, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. The storm wasn't trying to kill him anymore. It was trying to keep him away from what was underneath. The metal handle resisted at first, frozen in place as if it had no intention of ever being touched again, and Nathan could feel the seconds slipping away with every failed attempt, the cold biting deeper into his fingers, numbing them faster than he could react. But years of training didn't disappear just because the world had decided he didn't belong in it anymore, and he shifted his grip, bracing his weight, forcing controlled pressure instead of panic, until something finally gave with a sharp crack that echoed unnaturally beneath the storm, a sound too hollow, too deep, like it didn't belong to the mountain at all, and the moment it broke free, a low mechanical groan followed, ancient hinges resisting decades of silence as the hatch lifted just enough to release a sudden breath of air from below, not warm, not exactly cold either, but different. Stale in a way that told him immediately this place had been sealed for a very long time, and yet it was not dead, because Atlas reacted before Nathan could fully process it, stepping forward with a low, controlled growl vibrating through his chest, ears forward, eyes fixed on the darkness beneath the opening as if something inside was already aware of them. Nathan paused, crouched over the half-open hatch, his breath visible in short bursts, his body screaming at him to close it, to walk away, to choose survival over whatever unknown lay beneath, because instinct was warning him now, louder than before, sharper. This wasn't just shelter, this wasn't luck, this was a doorway into something that had been deliberately hidden, and yet there was another voice. Quieter but just as persistent, the same one that had kept him alive in places where hesitation meant death, the one that told him that turning away now wouldn't change anything, wouldn't erase the storm or the cold or the fact that the town had already decided his fate, and slowly, almost against his own better judgment, he pushed the hatch open wider. Darkness swallowed the space beneath, not empty darkness, but layered, thick, interrupted by the faintest hint of structure just below the surface, and after a moment his eyes adjusted enough to make out the top of a metal ladder descending into the ground, narrow, industrial, built for function rather than comfort, and something about that detail made his chest tighten slightly, because whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't abandoned in the usual sense, it was constructed with purpose, and purpose meant intent, and intent meant someone, somewhere, had decided this place needed to exist, and more importantly, needed to stay hidden. Atlas stepped closer, placing his front paws near the edge of the opening, leaning forward slightly but not committing, his body tense in a way Nathan had seen before, not fear, not hesitation, but awareness, the kind that came when something didn't add up, when instinct couldn't categorize what it was sensing, and Nathan watched him carefully, because the dog had never been wrong before, not in situations that mattered, not when lives were on the line. And yet Atlas wasn't pulling away, wasn't retreating, he was watching, waiting, as if whatever was below hadn't crossed the line into danger, yet. The wind surged again behind them, a violent gust that sent snow cascading into the open hatch, and that was enough to force the decision, because staying above ground was no longer an option, not with the temperature dropping further, not with the storm closing in harder, and without giving himself time to think it through. Nathan swung one leg over the edge and lowered himself onto the ladder, the metal biting through his gloves instantly. Cold transferring straight into bone as he began to descend, each step deliberate, controlled, his weight shifting carefully to test stability before committing fully, because the last thing he needed now was a collapse or a break that would trap him halfway between survival and whatever waited below. Atlas followed without hesitation. That alone told Nathan everything he needed to know. They descended slowly, the sound of the storm fading with each step, replaced by something else, something quieter but heavier, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, that made every small movement feel louder than it should, and after what felt like too many steps, his boots finally touched solid ground, the surface beneath him flat, cold, but stable, and when he looked up, Atlas was already beside him. His white coat faintly visible in the dimness, his breathing steady, controlled, as if the environment itself hadn't shaken him. Nathan reached back and pulled the hatch down above them, not fully sealing it but enough to block the direct force of the wind, and immediately the difference was noticeable, the air still cold but no longer aggressive, no longer stripping heat from his body with the same urgency, and for the first time since being forced out of the town, he felt something close to temporary relief, enough to think clearly again, enough to start processing where he was. He pulled a small flashlight from his pack, flicking it on with a sharp click that cut through the darkness, and the beam revealed more than he expected, not a simple bunker or storage space, but a narrow corridor extending forward, reinforced with aged steel panels that showed no signs of natural decay, only time, and even that had been controlled, preserved, as if whatever existed here had been built to last. Built to remain exactly as it was no matter how many years passed above it. Not random, Nathan muttered under his breath. Atlas moved ahead slightly, nose low, scanning the ground, the walls, the air itself, every movement precise, alert, and Nathan followed, his steps quieter now, instinctively minimizing noise despite the fact that there was no clear threat yet, because experience had taught him that the absence of visible danger didn't mean safety, it often meant the opposite. The corridor opened into a wider chamber after a short distance, and the moment the light reached it, Nathan stopped. Shelving units lined the walls. Metal, reinforced, filled with sealed containers, crates marked with symbols that didn't match anything civilian, anything modern, and at the center of the room stood a large, reinforced vault structure, its surface covered in frost but otherwise intact, untouched, as if time had paused the moment it was sealed. This wasn't survival storage. This wasn't emergency supplies. This was something else entirely. Something important. Something valuable. Atlas let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something in between, and Nathan followed his gaze toward the far side of the chamber where the beam of light caught on something different, something smaller, more detailed, and as he moved closer, the realization began to settle in piece by piece, slow but undeniable. Documents. Protected cases. Symbols etched into metal plates. Not American. Not military standard. Older. Far older. And suddenly, the pieces didn't just suggest a hidden bunker anymore. They suggested history. Hidden history. The kind people didn't bury unless it mattered. The kind people protected unless losing it would change something. Nathan exhaled slowly, his mind shifting gears again, moving away from immediate survival and into something sharper, more focused, because whatever this place was, it wasn't just a coincidence that he had found it, not after the way the town had reacted, not after the way Atlas had led him here with absolute certainty, and for the first time since his brother's death, something inside him moved, something small but real. Purpose. Atlas suddenly stiffened. Completely. His head snapped toward the corridor they had just entered from, ears forward, body rigid, and Nathan felt it immediately, that shift in the air, that subtle change that didn't come from inside the bunker but from above, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Sound. Footsteps. Muted by snow, carried through the opening above. More than one. Nathan's grip tightened on the flashlight, his body already adjusting, positioning, because the storm might have been trying to kill him before, but now it wasn't the only thing hunting him. And somewhere above them, hidden behind the screaming wind and falling snow, someone had followed him into the storm. And they were not here to help. Nathan didn't speak, because speaking would make it real, and right now reality was already closing in faster than he could control, but his body reacted anyway, shifting instinctively into something older than thought, something carved into him long before grief hollowed him out, his breathing slowing despite the cold, his posture lowering just enough to reduce his silhouette. Every sense sharpening at once as he turned off the flashlight without hesitation, plunging the chamber back into darkness except for the faint, ghost-like glow filtering through the half-sealed hatch far above, and in that darkness Atlas became something else entirely, no longer just a companion but a presence, silent, coiled, alert, his white coat now barely visible, his body aligned toward the corridor like a drawn line of intent, waiting, listening, and Nathan trusted that more than anything else in that moment because the dog wasn't guessing. He was reading something Nathan couldn't yet fully hear. The footsteps above grew clearer, not loud, not careless, but controlled, deliberate, the kind of movement that didn't belong to lost travelers or people seeking shelter, and that alone confirmed what Nathan already suspected. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't someone stumbling into the storm behind him. This was pursuit. And the realization tightened something in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with clarity. Because whoever they were, they already knew. Something was here, and more importantly, they knew someone had found it. A faint metallic sound followed, subtle but unmistakable, the hatch shifting, testing, and Nathan's eyes flicked upward even though he couldn't see it from where he stood, calculating distance, angles, possibilities. Because if they opened that hatch fully, light would flood in, silhouettes would form, and whatever advantage he had would disappear instantly, and for a split second he considered moving deeper into the bunker. Disappearing into the unknown rather than facing whatever was coming. Down that ladder, but Atlas didn't move, didn't retreat, and that alone held him in place, because the dog had already made a decision. Stay. Face it. The hatch opened. Just enough to let in a blade of pale, frozen light that cut through the darkness like a knife, outlining the top of the ladder and casting long shadows down into the corridor, and then came the voices, low, controlled, carrying just enough to reach them without revealing everything, but Nathan caught fragments, enough to understand tone if not full meaning. Tracks lead here, not far, check below. Not locals. Not confused. Purposeful. Nathan shifted slightly, positioning himself just off the direct line of the ladder, his body angled to remain in shadow, his muscles already prepared for movement if it came to that. But he wasn't looking for a fight, not here, not now, because survival wasn't about confrontation, it was about control, about choosing when and where things happened, and right now, control meant staying unseen. Atlas lowered his body slightly, not aggressive, not yet, but ready, every inch of him aligned with Nathan's movement without needing a command, and in that silence between them, something passed that didn't require words, a shared understanding built over years where hesitation had consequences, where trust wasn't optional, it was survival. A boot appeared on the ladder. Then another. Slow descent. Careful. The beam of a flashlight followed, cutting through the darkness in sharp, searching movements, sweeping across the corridor walls, the metal surfaces reflecting it in dull flashes that revealed just enough to be dangerous, and Nathan felt his pulse steady rather than spike, because this was familiar territory now, not the storm, not the cold, but the presence of people who meant harm, people who moved with intent. And that was something he understood. The first man reached the bottom. Heavy build. Dark winter gear. Weapons slung low but ready. Not military standard, but trained enough to be efficient. The second followed close behind. Same posture. Same control. They didn't speak at first. They scanned. Methodical. The flashlight beam passed within inches of Nathan's position once, lingering just long enough to threaten exposure, but the angle held, the shadows stayed intact, and the man moved on, stepping forward into the chamber without realizing how close he had come to changing everything. "They're here," the second man said quietly, voice tight, confirming what Nathan already knew. "How do you know?" the first asked. The beam shifted again, landing briefly on the disturbed snow near the entrance of the chamber, the marks left by Atlas's digging, by Nathan's hands, and it didn't take long for the conclusion to form. "Because someone opened it." Silence followed. Not confusion. Recognition. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, not from fear but from the confirmation that this was bigger than he had hoped, because people didn't send armed men into a blizzard to protect something small, something unimportant, and the deeper realization settled in quickly, cold and sharp as the air above. This place mattered. Enough to kill for. Atlas shifted. Just a fraction. But it was enough. The nearest man's head snapped toward the movement, the flashlight beam swinging back fast, faster than before, cutting across the space with urgency now, and Nathan knew the moment had passed, the thin line between unseen and exposed already breaking apart, and in that split second where everything slowed, where decisions compressed into instinct, he moved. Not toward them. Away. Deeper into the bunker. Atlas followed instantly. The flashlight beam caught the edge of movement, enough to trigger reaction. "Contact!" the man barked. Footsteps surged forward behind them, heavier now, louder, no longer careful, no longer controlled, and the silence of the bunker shattered as the chase began, Nathan's boots hitting the metal floor in sharp, echoing strikes as he moved through the chamber toward the far corridor he had barely noticed before, the one leading deeper into the structure, because forward was the only option left. "Stop!" a voice shouted behind him. He didn't. Atlas surged ahead slightly, taking the lead now, his body cutting through the darkness with certainty, and Nathan followed without hesitation because the dog wasn't running blind, he was choosing direction, reading something in the space that Nathan couldn't yet see, and that trust, that absolute reliance, was the only reason they weren't already trapped. The corridor narrowed. Turned. Dropped slightly. Old structure, built with purpose, not comfort. Behind them, the men followed, their lights flashing against the walls, their movements aggressive now, no longer cautious, no longer subtle, and Nathan could hear it in their breathing, in their footsteps, They weren't just chasing him. They were trying to catch him before he understood what he had found. The corridor opened again. Another chamber. Larger. Different. And this time, the flashlight beam from Nathan's hand, quickly flicked back on in motion, revealed something that made him slow just enough to register it. Not storage. Not supplies. Rows. Organized. Secured. Metal cases. Sealed. Marked. Symbols etched into them that didn't belong here. Old crests. Royal insignias. Foreign. And in that instant, even with danger closing in behind him, even with the storm still raging above and armed men only seconds away, one truth hit harder than everything else. This wasn't just hidden. This was buried history. Valuable history. Dangerous history. Atlas stopped again. Not from fear. From focus. He turned sharply toward a side passage Nathan hadn't seen, darker, narrower, almost concealed within the structure itself, and without waiting, he moved toward it, and Nathan followed because at this point there was no room left for doubt. Behind them, the first man reached the chamber entrance, his light cutting across the room, catching the edges of the cases, the symbols, the truth they were trying to protect, and his voice came out sharper this time, louder, urgent. "He's inside the archive!" Archive. The word echoed. Confirmed everything. Nathan didn't look back. He didn't slow down. Because now it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding why a buried archive worth killing for had been hidden beneath a mountain, and why a town full of strangers had decided he needed to die before he ever found it. And somewhere deeper in the structure, as Atlas led him into the narrow passage, something shifted again. Not behind them. Not above. Ahead. Faint. Mechanical. Like a system waking up. And this time, it wasn't quiet. The sound wasn't loud, but it was wrong in a way that cut through everything else, a low mechanical hum that didn't belong in a place buried this deep, this long, and Nathan felt it before he fully processed it, that shift in the air, that subtle vibration under his boots that told him this structure wasn't as dead as it looked, and behind him the footsteps were getting closer, louder now, no longer cautious, no longer controlled. Just raw pursuit fueled by urgency, and for a split second the entire situation snapped into focus with brutal clarity. Because he wasn't just running from men anymore, he was running into something that had just come back to life after decades of silence. Atlas didn't hesitate. He surged forward into the narrow passage, his body cutting through the darkness with absolute certainty, his movements faster now, sharper, driven by something deeper than instinct, and Nathan followed without question because at this point the dog wasn't reacting, he was leading with purpose, and that purpose had already proven itself more reliable than anything else Nathan had left. His boots striking the metal floor in controlled rhythm despite the growing fatigue creeping back into his limbs, the cold still clinging to him even down here, embedded in his bones, but overshadowed now by something else entirely, something heavier. The passage twisted sharply, forcing Nathan to brace against the wall to keep his balance, the metal cold and slick under his gloved hand, and as he turned the corner the space opened again, not into a chamber like before but into something more structured, more deliberate, a corridor lined with sealed compartments, each marked with the same foreign insignias he had glimpsed earlier, symbols that didn't belong to any American system. Symbols that spoke of something older, something protected. And the realization hit him harder now, clearer. This wasn't just an archive, it was a vault, a hidden repository of something valuable enough to bury beneath a mountain and guard with silence for decades. Behind him, a voice echoed through the corridor. "Split up!" That changed everything. Nathan's pace adjusted instantly, his mind recalculating, because multiple pursuers meant less predictability, less control, and more risk, and he couldn't rely on a single direction of threat anymore, couldn't assume where they would appear next, and that meant moving faster, thinking sharper, trusting Atlas even more than before, because the dog wasn't just reacting to sound, he was reading something deeper. Something Nathan couldn't perceive. Atlas slowed suddenly. Not stopping. Adjusting. His head lowered slightly, ears angled forward, his body shifting toward another narrow opening on the left, almost hidden within the structure itself, and Nathan followed the movement, slipping into the passage just as a beam of light swept past the corridor behind them, missing them by seconds, and the moment they were inside, the sound changed again, the echoes dampened, the space tighter, more confined. And Nathan realized this part of the structure wasn't designed for storage. It was designed for access. Control routes. Maintenance paths. Hidden movement. Smart. Nathan muttered under his breath, not sure if he meant the design or the situation. But either way it didn't matter now, because whoever built this place had thought about everything, including the possibility of someone moving through it unseen. Atlas stopped again. This time, he didn't move forward. He looked at the wall. Not randomly. Specifically. Nathan stepped closer, his flashlight beam cutting across the surface, revealing something subtle but undeniable, a seam in the metal, barely visible unless you were looking for it, and his hand moved instinctively, brushing along the edge until he felt it, a recessed panel, small, almost hidden, and without overthinking it, he pressed. A soft click. Then movement. The wall shifted inward just enough to reveal a concealed space beyond, darker than the rest, deeper, and for a moment Nathan hesitated, because every instinct screamed that going further meant committing fully, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but the sound of footsteps echoing closer behind him erased that hesitation completely. He stepped through. Atlas followed. The panel slid back into place behind them with a quiet, final sound that cut off the corridor completely. And just like that, the noise of pursuit faded, not gone, but distant, separated, and Nathan allowed himself a single breath, controlled, measured, because they had bought time, not safety. The new space was different. Larger. More open. And the moment his flashlight swept across it, the full reality of what he had found began to settle in. Rows of reinforced cases. Glass-fronted displays. Documents preserved with meticulous care. Artifacts. Old. Priceless. And at the center, a structure larger than anything else, a sealed archive chamber, its surface marked with the same royal insignia he had seen before. But here it was clearer, more defined, a crest that spoke of heritage, power, history that extended far beyond this mountain, far beyond this country. Royal, Nathan whispered, the word forming without effort. And then the number hit him. Stamped into the side of the main chamber. $200 million valuation. Even through layers of frost and time, the marking was clear enough to read. 200 million. Not just hidden. Protected. Buried. And suddenly the entire situation shifted again, because this wasn't just about survival anymore, this was about something far bigger, something people would kill to keep hidden. Something the town above had already proven they were willing to protect at any cost. Atlas moved forward slowly now, his posture no longer tense with immediate danger but focused, deliberate, his nose scanning the air, the ground, the structure itself, and Nathan followed, his eyes moving over the details, absorbing everything as quickly as possible, because information was survival now, understanding mattered more than anything else. But then Atlas froze. Completely. Not a shift. Not a pause. A full stop. His ears snapped forward, his body rigid, his attention locked on the far side of the chamber where the light didn't fully reach, where shadows pulled deeper, thicker, and Nathan felt it instantly, that same shift he had felt before, that subtle change in the air that meant something wasn't right. He raised the flashlight slowly, angling the beam toward the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. Just shadow. Stillness. Then something moved. Not fast. Not obvious. But enough. A shape. Low. Deliberate. And then the sound followed. A faint metallic scrape. Not from the men chasing them. From something already inside. Nathan's grip tightened, his body lowering instinctively, every sense locking into place as the realization hit him with quiet force. They weren't alone down here. And whatever was in the shadows had been here long before he arrived. Nathan didn't move, because movement in a moment like this wasn't action, it was exposure, and whatever had just shifted in the darkness ahead was not reacting with panic or surprise. It was controlled, measured, aware, and that alone told him more than any sound could, because trained movement had a signature, whether it came from soldiers, hunters, or something that had survived long enough in isolation to learn patience. And Atlas felt it too, his entire body locked in a silent line of tension, head low, ears forward, the faintest rumble building deep in his chest but held back, restrained, waiting for a command that hadn't yet been given, because this wasn't a fight they understood, this wasn't a threat they could identify, and for a brief second the weight of the situation settled heavier than the cold ever had, because the storm above had been predictable, measurable, survivable, but this was unknown, buried under layers of secrecy and time, and now it was awake. The beam of Nathan's flashlight steadied, cutting through the darkness inch by inch, revealing fragments instead of answers, a section of metal railing, a broken crate pushed slightly out of place, the edge of what looked like a collapsed support beam that hadn't fully given in, and then again. That movement, subtle but deliberate, something shifting just beyond the reach of light, not retreating, not rushing forward, just adjusting, observing, and Nathan's instincts sharpened instantly because that wasn't random, that wasn't an animal startled into motion, that was awareness, and awareness meant intelligence, and intelligence meant decision-making. And whatever was making those decisions had chosen not to reveal itself yet. Behind them, faint but growing louder, came the muffled echo of voices again, distorted through layers of metal and structure but unmistakable, the men from above still searching, still moving, still closing distance in ways that couldn't be ignored, and Nathan's mind split cleanly between two threats, one visible but distant, the other hidden but immediate, and neither gave him the luxury of hesitation. Because staying still too long would allow one to catch up while turning too quickly might trigger the other, and in that narrow space between choices, Atlas shifted first. Not forward. Not back. Sideways. A controlled reposition, placing himself slightly in front of Nathan but angled toward the darkness, his body acting as both shield and sensor, his eyes locked onto that same unseen point, and Nathan understood instantly. Because Atlas wasn't reacting out of fear, he was preparing, measuring distance, waiting for the exact moment something crossed the line, and that told Nathan everything he needed to know. Whatever was out there hadn't decided to attack yet. Easy, Nathan whispered, voice barely a breath. The growl in Atlas's chest softened, but didn't disappear. The air changed again. A shift. Not physical, not something the eyes could catch easily, but something in the silence itself, as if the space between sounds tightened, and then, slowly, deliberately, a figure stepped just far enough into the edge of the flashlight beam to exist. Not a rush. Not a threat display. A reveal. Nathan's grip tightened slightly, but his posture didn't change, because reacting too fast would escalate something he didn't yet understand, and the figure became clearer with each second, not fully illuminated, but enough to define shape, human, upright, heavy winter gear worn beyond standard use, layered and reinforced with pieces that didn't match any official issue, and then the face caught part of the light, rough, aged, lined with years that didn't belong underground, a thick beard, partially frozen at the edges, and eyes, not hostile, not surprised, but sharp in a way that spoke of someone who had already processed the situation before Nathan had fully arrived in it. "You shouldn't be here," the man said quietly, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had spent too long speaking only when necessary. Nathan didn't answer immediately, because the statement wasn't a threat, it was a fact, and facts were easier to work with than emotion, easier to respond to without escalating things, and Atlas remained still, his body tense but not advancing, his focus unbroken. "Neither should they," Nathan replied after a moment, nodding slightly toward the distant sound of pursuit. The man's eyes shifted briefly in that direction, not with fear, but with confirmation, as if he had expected it, as if this moment had been building long before Nathan ever stepped onto the mountain. "They always come when it's found," he said, almost to himself. Found. The word landed heavier than it should have. Nathan's mind moved quickly, connecting fragments, the town's hostility, the storm timing, The immediate pursuit, and now this man, already here, already aware, and one conclusion began to form with uncomfortable clarity: this wasn't just a hidden archive, it was something watched, something guarded, not openly, not officially, but deliberately, and the man standing in front of him was part of that system. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice level. The man studied him for a second longer, his gaze flicking briefly to Atlas, noting the dog's posture, his readiness, his control, and something shifted in his expression, not trust, not yet, but recognition. "Name's Marcus," he said finally. "And if that dog brought you here, then you're already in deeper than you understand." Atlas didn't react to the name. But he didn't relax either. The sounds behind them grew louder again, closer now, echoing differently through the structure, splitting across corridors, confirming what Nathan had already suspected. They had divided, they were searching systematically, and time was shrinking faster than options. "They're coming," Nathan said. Marcus nodded once, slow, deliberate. "They always do." There was no panic in his voice. Only certainty. Nathan's eyes moved briefly across the chamber again, taking in the rows of preserved cases, the central vault, the markings that tied everything together, and the weight of it settled deeper now. This wasn't just valuable, it was controlled history, the kind that could shift power if exposed, the kind that people didn't just hide, they protected, at any cost. "What is this place?" Nathan asked. Marcus hesitated, just enough to matter, just enough to confirm that the answer wasn't simple, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried something heavier than before. "A mistake," he said. "One they buried so deep they thought no one would ever dig it up." Atlas moved then. Not toward Marcus. Not toward the sound behind them. Toward the central vault. Slow. Deliberate. His nose lowering slightly, his body aligning with something unseen, something specific, and Nathan followed the movement with his eyes, because at this point the dog's instincts were the only thing that had been consistently right, and as Atlas stopped in front of the massive sealed structure, his posture changed again, not defensive, not aggressive, but focused in a way that sent a quiet signal through Nathan's mind. This was it. The real center. Not the rooms. Not the corridors. That vault. Marcus saw it too. His expression tightened slightly, the first real sign of tension breaking through his controlled exterior. "No," he said under his breath. But Atlas didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer, placing his paw against the cold surface of the vault, his head tilting slightly as if listening, as if sensing something beyond the metal, something deeper than the obvious, and Nathan felt it then, not through sound or sight, but through something harder to define, a subtle pressure in the air, a presence, like the structure itself wasn't just storing something, it was holding something. "What's in there?" Nathan asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Because at that exact moment, the lights flickered. Not bright. Not fully on. But alive. For the first time in decades. And somewhere behind the sealed vault door, something responded. A low internal sound. Not mechanical. Not entirely. Something in between. And Atlas stepped back. Not in fear. But in warning. Because whatever was inside that vault had just become aware they were standing outside it. The flicker didn't die this time, it lingered, weak but persistent, thin strips of emergency lighting embedded along the ceiling coughing themselves back to life in uneven pulses that painted the chamber in a dim, sickly glow, and Nathan felt the shift immediately because darkness had been an advantage, concealment had been control, but light changed everything, it exposed, it revealed, it made movement visible and mistakes permanent. And as the faint illumination spread across the walls, across the sealed cases, across the massive vault where Atlas now stood rigid, something deeper than instinct tightened in his chest because this place was no longer dormant, it was reacting, and whatever system had just woken up didn't care who had triggered it. Behind them, the distant voices sharpened, no longer muffled confusion but focused direction, boots striking metal faster now, more aggressive, and one word echoed clearly enough to cut through the structure like a blade. "Lights!" Followed by another voice, sharper, urgent. He's inside, move! And that confirmed everything Nathan needed to know, because the moment the system came alive, it didn't just reveal the bunker, it revealed them, and the men hunting him no longer needed to guess where to go. Marcus moved first, not toward the corridor, not toward escape, but toward the vault, his steps quick but controlled, his hand brushing across the frozen metal surface as if checking something only he understood, his eyes scanning for details hidden beneath layers of frost and time, and for the first time since Nathan had seen him, there was something close to concern in his expression, not fear. But the kind of tension that came when something predictable suddenly wasn't anymore. It shouldn't be doing that, Marcus muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Atlas let out a low, warning growl, deeper now, more pronounced, his body angled slightly away from the vault as if creating distance without retreating fully, and Nathan trusted that reaction more than anything Marcus could say, because the dog didn't care about systems or history, he reacted to presence, to change, to threat. And right now every instinct in him was signaling that whatever had just been triggered inside that vault was not passive. "What, did you just wake up?" Nathan asked, his voice low but edged with urgency. Marcus didn't answer immediately, his jaw tightening slightly as if weighing how much to say, how much to reveal, but the decision was taken from him by the sound that came next, louder now, clearer, not just a hum but a sequence, something mechanical aligning, shifting, like internal components moving after decades of stillness, and then a sharper sound cut through it, a metallic lock disengaging somewhere deep within the structure. Nathan's attention snapped back to the vault. The surface hadn't moved. Not yet. But the sound was unmistakable. Something inside was unlocking. Atlas stepped back another pace, his posture no longer just alert but defensive now, shoulders squared, weight balanced, ready. And that alone told Nathan everything he needed to know about how serious this was, because Atlas didn't prepare like that unless the situation demanded it. "We need to move," Nathan said. Marcus shook his head slightly, his eyes still locked on the vault. "If that opens without control," he started, but didn't finish, because he didn't need to, the implication hung heavy enough in the air, unfinished but understood. Behind them, the corridor echoed again, closer now, footsteps splitting, voices overlapping, one of them shouting something Nathan couldn't fully make out, but the tone was enough. They were seconds away from entering the chamber, and now there were no more good options, only choices between dangers. Atlas shifted suddenly, his head snapping toward the side passage they had used earlier, ears forward, body tense, and Nathan followed the movement just as a beam of light cut across the entrance of the chamber, sweeping fast, searching, and then locking onto the space where they stood. "There!" one of the men shouted. Everything collapsed into motion. Nathan grabbed Marcus's arm without thinking, pulling him back from the vault as the first man stepped into the chamber, weapon raised, light blinding in the dim space, and Atlas moved at the same instant, not attacking, not engaging, but repositioning, drawing attention just enough to create an opening, his white form cutting across the edge of the beam before vanishing into shadow again, forcing the man's aim to shift, forcing his focus to break for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Nathan moved. Not toward the exit. Not toward the fight. Toward the deeper passage. "Move!" he snapped. Marcus hesitated for less than a second, then followed, his instincts aligning with Nathan's decision because staying here meant being trapped between armed men and an opening vault, and neither of those outcomes ended well. Behind them, the men surged forward, shouting, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor, their lights slicing through the chamber in chaotic patterns now, and one of them fired, a sharp crack that echoed violently in the enclosed space, the sound deafening, but the shot went wide, striking metal with a shower of sparks that briefly illuminated the entire room in harsh flashes of orange. Atlas ran ahead, faster now, his movements precise despite the shifting light, his path not random but chosen, cutting through the narrow passage with certainty, and Nathan followed close behind, his breathing controlled despite the strain building in his body, the cold still clinging to him, his muscles starting to protest again. But none of that mattered now because survival had shifted into something more immediate, more violent. The passage twisted again, tighter, more complex, designed to confuse anyone who didn't know it, and for a moment Nathan realized something that changed the way he saw everything. This wasn't just a bunker, it was a system, a network, built to hide, to protect, to control access, and that meant there were paths here that only certain people knew. Marcus. Nathan glanced at him briefly. You know this place, he said, not a question. Marcus didn't deny it. Enough, he replied, his voice tight with movement. Then lead, Nathan said. But before Marcus could respond, the structure behind them shifted again, louder this time, heavier, and then came the sound that froze all three of them mid-step. The vault door. Opening. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to be heard. A deep, grinding movement, metal against metal, ancient mechanisms forcing themselves back into motion after years of stillness, and the air changed with it, colder somehow, sharper, carrying something that didn't belong to the surface world, something sealed away for a reason. The men behind them stopped firing. Their voices changed. Confusion replacing aggression. What the hell is that? One of them shouted. No one answered. Because the answer was already moving. Somewhere behind that opening vault door, something had just been released. Atlas let out a low, warning growl unlike anything Nathan had heard before, deeper, sharper, instinctive in a way that cut through everything else, and Nathan felt it in his bones, that primal recognition that whatever they had just triggered was no longer contained. Marcus, Nathan said quietly. But Marcus was already looking back, his face pale now, his eyes fixed on something Nathan couldn't yet see, something emerging from the shadows behind them, something moving slow, deliberate, and very much alive. We didn't just find the archive, Marcus whispered. We opened it. And then, the lights went out completely. Not flickering. Not fading. Gone. Leaving only darkness, and the sound of something breathing, somewhere in the bunker with them. The darkness didn't just fall, it swallowed, complete and absolute, cutting off depth, distance, direction, until the only thing that still existed was sound, breath, and the instinct screaming through Nathan's body that something had changed in a way that couldn't be undone, and for a split second no one moved, not Nathan, not Marcus, not even the men behind them, because whatever that last sound had been, whatever had shifted inside the vault, it had erased the difference between hunter and target, replacing it with something far more dangerous, something unknown, and in that silence Atlas stepped forward, just one pace, his body lowering slightly, his head angled toward the source of that breath, his growl now steady, controlled, not panicked but warning, and Nathan trusted that reaction more than anything his eyes could no longer see. Then the sound came again. Closer. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Measured. A slow exhale followed by the faint scrape of something against metal, like weight shifting across the floor with deliberate control, and Nathan's mind ran through possibilities with brutal efficiency, none of them good, because nothing that moved like that in a sealed underground vault was harmless, and nothing that had been hidden this carefully was meant to be found alive. Behind them, one of the men broke first. "Turn the lights back on!" he snapped, voice cutting through the dark with panic he couldn't quite contain, and the second man fumbled with something, a switch, a device, anything that might restore control, but nothing responded, nothing came back, and the silence that followed was worse than the darkness itself because it confirmed that whatever system had woken up wasn't under their control anymore. Nathan moved slowly, his hand sliding toward the small flashlight clipped to his gear, but he didn't turn it on immediately, because light would reveal him just as much as it revealed anything else, and right now uncertainty was the only advantage he had left. But Atlas made the decision for him, shifting forward another step, his body tense, his head lifting slightly as if tracking movement at a height that didn't match the floor. And that detail alone sent a cold line of realization through Nathan's spine. It wasn't crawling. It was standing. Nathan clicked the flashlight on. The beam cut through the darkness in a sharp line, slicing across the chamber, catching fragments of motion before settling on a shape just at the edge of visibility, and for a moment his brain refused to process what he was seeing because it didn't fit any expectation, didn't match any category his instincts had prepared him for, not an animal, not a machine, not something simple, but a man. Or something that had once been one. He stood near the edge of the open vault, half in shadow, half in the thin beam of light, his frame tall but slightly uneven, like something had changed in the way he carried his weight, his clothes layered with age, military fabric mixed with older materials that didn't belong together, and his face, pale, drawn, eyes reflecting the light in a way that felt wrong, not lifeless, but not entirely present either. And for a second the entire chamber held its breath. "Don't!" Marcus whispered under his breath, but it wasn't clear if he was warning Nathan or the men behind them. The figure tilted its head slightly, a slow, unnatural movement that didn't match the rest of his stillness, and then he spoke. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But clearly. "You shouldn't have opened it." The words landed heavier than any threat, because they weren't spoken with anger, they were spoken with certainty, like a statement that had been waiting for years to be said, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest again, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, because this wasn't just a random survivor, this was someone who knew exactly what this place was, exactly why it had been sealed. Behind Nathan, one of the armed men reacted the only way he knew how. "Get on the ground!" he shouted, his weapon raising, his voice breaking slightly under pressure. The figure didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't acknowledge the command at all. And that was enough. The shot came fast. A sharp crack that echoed violently through the chamber, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating everything in harsh white light, and for a split second the entire scene froze in clarity, the vault, the cases, the man standing in front of it, and then the bullet struck. But not the way it should have. The impact hit center mass, the force visible in the way the figure's body shifted slightly backward, but there was no collapse, no reaction beyond the physical movement, and when the light faded back into darkness, he was still standing exactly where he had been. Atlas barked once. Sharp. Loud. A warning. The figure's head snapped toward the dog instantly, faster than anything else he had done, and that movement was wrong in a way Nathan couldn't ignore, too quick, too precise, like something beyond normal human reaction, and suddenly the situation wasn't just dangerous, it was unstable. "What the hell is he?" one of the men whispered, his voice no longer steady. The figure stepped forward. Just one step. But it changed everything. The sound of his boot hitting the metal floor echoed deeper than it should have, like there was more weight behind it than his frame suggested, and Nathan felt the shift in Atlas immediately, the dog moving slightly in front of him again, protective now, his body aligned between Nathan and whatever stood in front of them, his growl rising again, louder this time, more urgent. "Back up," Nathan said quietly, not taking his eyes off the figure. Marcus didn't argue. He stepped back. Slow. Controlled. The armed men didn't. One of them fired again. 2 shots this time. Closer. More desperate. The figure moved. Not away. Forward. The bullet struck again, the impacts visible, real, but still, no fall, no stop, just a continuation of motion that didn't make sense, that broke every rule Nathan had learned about force and consequence, and for the first time since entering the bunker, something close to real fear cut through the control he had been holding on to. "Stop shooting!" Marcus snapped, his voice sharp now. But it was too late. The situation had already crossed the line. The figure closed the distance faster than expected, not running, not rushing, just moving with a kind of efficiency that ignored hesitation, and then everything collapsed into chaos as one of the men panicked, turning to run, his light swinging wildly, his footing breaking on the metal floor as he tried to retreat, and the figure didn't chase him. He reached. Just one motion. Fast. Controlled. And the man dropped. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just stopped. Like something had been turned off. The second man froze. His weapon lowering slightly. His breathing loud now, uneven. "What are you?" He started, but didn't finish, because the answer was already standing in front of him. Nathan didn't wait. "Move!" he snapped to Marcus, grabbing his arm again. Atlas reacted instantly, turning, leading them back into the narrow passage they had used before, his movements faster now, urgent, no longer just guiding but pushing them forward, away from whatever had just stepped out of that vault. Behind them, the chamber fell silent again. No more shouting. No more gunfire. Just the faint echo of that same breathing, steady, controlled, following. Nathan didn't look back. Because he already knew one thing with absolute certainty. They hadn't just uncovered a secret. They had released something that was never meant to see the surface again. And now, it was coming with them. Nathan didn't slow down, because slowing down meant letting the sound behind them close the distance, and that sound, steady, controlled, unhurried, was worse than any pursuit he had faced before, because it carried no panic, no exhaustion, no limit, just a constant presence that didn't need to rush to win, and the narrow passage seemed to tighten around them as they moved, the air colder again, sharper, pressing into his lungs with every breath as the last warmth he had recovered began to fade. But Atlas kept moving, faster now, his paws striking metal in quick, precise rhythms, his body low and forward, guiding them through turns and bends that no one without instinct or memory could have chosen, and Nathan followed without question because there was no room left for doubt, not when everything behind them had already proven it didn't follow the rules of survival. Marcus stumbled once, catching himself against the wall with a rough exhale, his breath uneven now, his earlier control slipping under the weight of what they had just witnessed, and Nathan caught his arm without breaking stride, pulling him forward, forcing momentum because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant freezing, and freezing meant dying. Not just from the cold but from whatever was tracking them through the structure with that same quiet certainty. "What is that thing?" Nathan demanded, his voice low but edged, cutting through the movement. Marcus shook his head once, sharp, frustrated. "It wasn't supposed to be alive," he said, the words coming out strained, like he didn't fully believe them himself. "That doesn't answer anything," Nathan replied. "It's not something you answer in a sentence." Marcus snapped back, then immediately lowered his voice as the passage curved again, his eyes flicking behind them even though the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. "This place wasn't just for storage, it was containment." The word landed harder than anything else so far. Containment. Not archive. Not vault. Containment. Nathan felt it settle deep, connecting everything in a way that made the situation worse instead of clearer. Because archives didn't move, they didn't breathe, they didn't survive gunfire without consequence, and the realization cut through him with brutal clarity. Whatever they had just opened wasn't guarding the archive. It was part of it. Atlas slowed suddenly, his body dropping lower, his head turning sharply toward a narrow split in the wall ahead, almost invisible unless you were already looking for it, and without hesitation he moved toward it, slipping through the opening with practiced ease, and Nathan followed immediately, pulling Marcus through just as the faint echo of footsteps behind them shifted direction, not losing them, but adjusting, tracking. And that alone confirmed the worst possibility. It wasn't guessing. It was following. The new passage was tighter, lower, forcing Nathan to duck slightly as he moved, the walls closer now, the air heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent mixed with something older, something that didn't belong to machinery or storage, something organic that had been sealed away for far too long, and Atlas pushed forward, faster now, urgency driving his movement as if he understood that distance wasn't safety anymore, only delay. The passage opened abruptly into another chamber, smaller than the archive room but structured differently, with a central console covered in dust and frost, cables running along the walls into systems that hadn't been touched in years, and Nathan's eyes moved quickly, scanning, processing, because every space in this bunker had purpose, every design choice meant something, and this room felt like control. Marcus moved toward the console instinctively. "This is it," he muttered, brushing frost away with his sleeve, exposing a panel beneath. "What does it control?" Nathan asked, keeping his position near the entrance, his body angled toward the passage they had just come through. Marcus didn't look up. "Everything. Or it used to," he said, his fingers moving quickly now, flipping switches that resisted at first, then gave way with small mechanical clicks that echoed too loudly in the confined space. Atlas turned back toward the passage. Growling again. Louder. Closer now. Nathan felt it too. That shift in the air. That presence drawing nearer. Marcus, Nathan said sharply. Give me a second. Marcus replied, his voice tight with urgency, his hands moving faster now, forcing systems that didn't want to respond, and then suddenly the panel flickered, a weak surge of power running through the console, lights blinking on one by one in a scattered sequence that suggested the system was reconnecting piece by piece. A map appeared. Faint. Incomplete. But enough. Lines of the bunker structure, corridors, chambers, pathways branching in multiple directions, and one section pulsed weakly in red, deeper than the rest, isolated, marked differently. That's where it was kept, Marcus said, pointing at the pulsing section. Was? Nathan repeated. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the pulsing red shifted. Moved. Not much. But enough to change everything. It wasn't marking a location anymore. It was tracking movement. And it was moving toward them. Atlas barked. Sharp. Urgent. Nathan turned instantly, raising the flashlight toward the passage, the beam cutting through the darkness just as something moved at the far end, faster than before, closer than it should have been, and for a split second the light caught it fully. The figure. Closer now. Much closer. And there was something different. Not in its posture. Not in its movement. But in its eyes. They reflected the light now. Bright. Focused. Aware in a way that didn't belong to something that had been sealed away for decades. Marcus! Nathan snapped. I see it! Marcus replied, his hand slamming down on a final switch. The chamber responded instantly. A low hum surged through the walls as sections of the bunker began to shift, distant doors locking, pathways sealing, metal barriers sliding into place with heavy, echoing force, and for a moment Nathan thought it might work, that they might actually cut off whatever was coming after them. But the figure didn't stop. It didn't even slow. It reached the entrance of the passage and stepped forward as if the distance meant nothing, as if barriers didn't matter, and the moment it crossed into the light again, the truth hit harder than before. This wasn't just something that had survived. It was something that had adapted. The barrier slammed down behind it, cutting off the path it had come from, sealing the corridor with a heavy crash, but the figure was already inside the chamber, already past the point of containment, and Atlas stepped forward, placing himself directly between Nathan and the threat, his body low, his stance firm, every inch of him ready. No! Nathan said, grabbing for him instinctively. But Atlas didn't move back. He held his ground. The figure stopped. Just a few feet away. Silent. Watching. And for a moment, everything paused again, the system humming around them, the storm still raging somewhere far above, the bunker alive in a way it hadn't been in decades, and Nathan realized something that made the situation even more dangerous than before. It wasn't attacking. It was choosing. Deciding. And then it spoke again. You don't understand what you've taken from them, it said, its voice clearer now, stronger, less distant. Nathan's grip tightened slightly. Then explain it, he said. The figure tilted its head slightly, that same unnatural motion, and for the first time, there was something else in its expression. Not anger. Not threat. Something closer to warning. If they get it back, it said slowly, they won't bury it again. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unfinished. And behind Nathan, the console flickered again. New signals appearing. Multiple. Moving fast. Marcus turned, his face tightening as he saw it. They're not alone anymore, he said quietly. Nathan didn't need to ask who they were. Because whatever had been hidden beneath this mountain wasn't just protected by the town. It was protected by something much bigger. And now, it was coming for all of them. Nathan felt the shift before anyone spoke again, that subtle tightening of space and time when too many threats begin to overlap, when survival stops being about reacting and becomes about choosing which danger you're willing to face first, and the glow from the console behind him flickered just enough to cast fragmented light across Marcus's face, revealing something that hadn't been there before. Not just fear, but recognition. The kind that comes when a situation escalates beyond anything you hoped it would become, and Atlas didn't take his eyes off the figure standing in front of them, his body still planted firmly between Nathan and whatever had stepped out of that vault, his growl low and continuous now, not a warning anymore but a boundary, a line drawn in instinct rather than logic, and the figure watched him in return, not with aggression, not with the urgency of something hunting, but with a stillness that felt calculated, like it was measuring them, weighing outcomes, deciding what mattered and what didn't. "They're coming from every direction," Marcus said, his voice quieter now but sharper, his eyes fixed on the shifting signals across the console, the blinking points spreading through the bunker map like a net tightening around them. "Not just the men from the town, this is bigger, way bigger." And Nathan didn't need more explanation than that, because he had already seen enough to understand that this wasn't local control anymore. This was coordinated, organized, and whatever had been buried here had just triggered something far beyond the mountain, something that didn't tolerate exposure. "Then we don't stay," Nathan replied, his voice steady despite the pressure building in his chest, because clarity was the only thing keeping him ahead of panic, and panic got people killed faster than any storm ever could, and Atlas shifted slightly at that, not retreating, not advancing, but adjusting his stance just enough to mirror Nathan's intent, because the dog wasn't just reacting to threat anymore, he was reading Nathan himself, aligning with decisions before they were fully spoken. The figure moved again. Slow. Controlled. Another step forward. And Nathan felt it this time not just as movement, but as presence, something pressing into the space between them, something that didn't rely on speed or force to dominate a situation, and his grip tightened instinctively, his body lowering just enough to prepare, because if this turned into a fight, it wouldn't be one he could win by strength alone, not after what he had already seen. Not after bullets had done nothing but confirm that whatever stood in front of him didn't follow the same rules as everything else. "You shouldn't run," the figure said, its voice quieter now, but somehow more direct, cutting through everything else without needing to rise in volume. "They'll find you faster out there." And the words landed with a strange weight, not as a threat, not even as a warning exactly, but as a statement of fact, and Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly because there was something in the tone that didn't match the situation, something that didn't align with hostility or control, something closer to resignation. "Then we don't go out there," Nathan replied. The figure tilted its head again, studying him, and for a moment the silence stretched just long enough to make the tension unbearable, because behind Nathan the signals on the console continued to multiply, continued to move, and the sound of distant mechanisms shifting through the bunker began to build again, doors opening, pathways unlocking, systems responding to something beyond their control. And the realization settled in deeper now, the bunker wasn't sealing itself anymore, it was opening. "They've already taken the upper levels," Marcus said, his voice tighter now, his hands hovering over the console like he was searching for something that no longer existed. "We're running out of space." Atlas barked once. Sharp. Not at the figure. Behind them. Nathan turned instantly, the flashlight beam snapping toward the opposite entrance of the chamber just as a new sound broke through the noise of systems and distant movement, heavier, faster, coordinated footsteps, more than two this time, more than the original men who had followed them down, and then the light hit them, figures in darker gear, more structured, more uniform, their movements sharper, more precise. Their weapons raised with a kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what they were walking into. Not locals. Not improvisation. Professionals. "Contact!" one of them shouted, his voice clear, controlled, cutting through the chamber like a command rather than a reaction. Nathan's mind adjusted instantly, shifting from unknown threat to known structure, because this was something he understood: trained movement, coordinated approach, clear objective, and that clarity was both a relief and a problem, because unlike the figure in front of him, these men would not hesitate, would not pause to observe or decide, they would act. Down! Nathan snapped, grabbing Marcus and pulling him sideways just as the first shots cracked through the chamber. Controlled bursts rather than panic fire, bullets striking metal surfaces with violent sparks that lit the space in brief flashes. And Atlas moved at the same instant, not attacking but repositioning again, his body cutting across Nathan's movement to stay between him and the incoming threat. His instincts perfectly aligned with survival rather than aggression. The figure didn't react the same way. It didn't dodge. Didn't retreat. It simply turned. And for the first time, it faced the new threat directly. The shots hit it again. Multiple impacts this time. Close range. Center mass. And again, nothing. No fall. No break. Just a slight shift in posture, a momentary adjustment like something acknowledging force without being affected by it, and the men firing hesitated, just enough for confusion to crack through their control, just enough for doubt to enter the space. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered, his voice breaking slightly. Nathan didn't waste a moment. "Move!" he shouted to Marcus, pushing him toward the side corridor, because confusion was the only advantage they were going to get, and it wouldn't last long, not with trained operators recalibrating in real time. Atlas followed instantly, his body already moving toward the exit path, and Nathan stayed just behind him, keeping low, using the flashes of gunfire as cover instead of exposure, because every burst of light blinded as much as it revealed, and in those fractured moments of vision, distance became survival. Behind them, something changed. Not in the gunfire. Not in the movement. In the sound. A deeper impact. Not metal. Not bullet. Force. Nathan didn't look back immediately. He didn't need to. Because the sudden break in gunfire told him everything. The figure had engaged. And whatever rules applied to it, didn't apply to the men who had just entered. The chamber erupted into chaos behind them, not loud in the way of battle, but sharp, contained, movements cut short, voices interrupted, and Nathan pushed forward harder, forcing distance between them and whatever was happening because understanding it didn't matter right now, surviving it did. They reached the corridor. Turned. Ran. The bunker shifted again, the hum of systems growing louder, pathways opening in sequences that no longer made sense, and Marcus glanced back once, just long enough to catch something that made his face tighten even further. "It's not attacking randomly," he said, breath uneven, voice strained. "It's choosing who to stop." Nathan didn't respond. Because he already understood that. And the realization made everything worse. Because if it was choosing, then sooner or later, it would choose them too. Ahead, the corridor split again, multiple paths branching into darkness, and Atlas slowed just enough to decide, his body turning sharply toward the narrowest path, the least obvious, the one that didn't promise escape but something else entirely, and Nathan followed without question because at this point there was only one truth left that mattered. The dog knew something they didn't. And whatever he was leading them toward was more important than running away. Behind them, the bunker continued to wake. Above them, the storm still raged. And somewhere between both, the truth they had uncovered was no longer buried. It was moving. And it wasn't done yet. Nathan didn't question Atlas anymore because whatever logic had guided his life before this night had already collapsed under the weight of everything he had seen, everything he had lost, and everything now hunting him through a buried system that was never meant to exist, and the narrow corridor they entered felt different immediately, tighter, older. Less maintained than the rest of the bunker, as if it had been forgotten or deliberately ignored, the metal walls rougher, the air colder again. With a biting edge that reminded him of the storm above, and Atlas moved through it with a strange urgency that wasn't driven by fear but by purpose, his body low, his movements precise, his nose occasionally brushing the ground or the wall as if tracking something deeper than scent, something layered into the structure itself, and Nathan followed close behind with Marcus struggling slightly to keep pace, his breath heavier now. His earlier control cracking under the reality of what they had unleashed, because this was no longer about a hidden archive or a buried fortune, This was about something far older and far more dangerous that had been locked away for a reason, and that reason was now walking freely through the bunker behind them, choosing who lived and who didn't. The corridor narrowed further before opening into a steep incline leading upward, not toward the main levels they had entered through but towards something else, a secondary exit or perhaps an older access route that had been sealed off from the primary system, and Nathan felt a flicker of hope cut through the tension because upward meant surface, and surface meant the storm. And for the first time since this began, the storm didn't feel like the enemy anymore, it felt like cover, like a barrier between them and whatever had been released. But that hope didn't last long because Atlas slowed again, not stopping but adjusting his pace, his ears shifting, his body angling slightly as if listening to something beyond the immediate space, and Nathan caught it a second later, faint at first but growing clearer, movement above them, not the storm, not wind, something heavier, coordinated. And then voices filtered down through the metal structure, different from the ones before, sharper, more controlled, and that confirmed Marcus's warning from earlier. They weren't just being hunted from below anymore, the surface was compromised too. "They've sealed the exits," Marcus said under his breath, his voice tight with realization, and Nathan didn't respond immediately because his mind was already shifting again, recalculating, adapting, because if both directions were blocked then the only path left was the one no one else knew, the one Atlas was choosing, and that meant whatever lay ahead wasn't escape in the traditional sense, it was something else entirely. Something tied to the very reason this place existed, and the realization settled heavy but clear. They weren't being led out of the bunker, they were being led deeper into its truth. The incline leveled out into another chamber, smaller but older than the rest, the walls lined with equipment that looked decades out of date, cables hanging loose, panels half torn open, and at the center stood a reinforced door unlike anything else they had seen, thicker, heavier, marked not with the royal insignias of the archive but with something more official, more controlled. A symbol that Nathan recognized immediately even through the frost and decay, a classified military seal, not current, not active, but real, and that changed everything because it meant this place hadn't just been hidden by history, it had been buried with intent by people who understood exactly what they were containing. Atlas moved directly to the door, stopping in front of it with that same focused stillness he had shown at the vault, his paw lifting slightly before resting against the metal as if confirming something only he could sense, and Nathan stepped closer, his hand brushing over the surface, feeling the cold bite through his glove, and beneath it something else, a faint vibration, subtle but present, like the door wasn't just locked, it was active. Holding something back or perhaps holding something in, and behind them the distant sounds of pursuit shifted again, louder now, closer, overlapping from multiple directions as the people hunting them closed in from both above and below, and for the first time since the storm began Nathan understood the full scale of what they were trapped inside. This wasn't a bunker anymore, it was a cage, and every path they had taken had led them to its center. "This wasn't just storage," Marcus said quietly, his voice almost lost in the tension. "This was containment for something they couldn't destroy." And Nathan didn't need more explanation than that because everything pointed to the same truth, the archive, the vault, the figure, it was all connected, and the door in front of them was the final piece, the origin, the reason this entire system existed, and Atlas knew it, had known it from the moment he started digging in the snow above, and that realization cut deeper than anything else because it meant this wasn't chance, it wasn't survival, it was discovery. And now they were standing at the edge of something no one else had been allowed to reach. The first impact hit the corridor behind them with a heavy metallic crash, followed by shouting commands, the sound of tools or weapons forcing entry through the pathways Marcus had tried to seal, and Nathan's time ran out completely in that instant because whatever decision needed to be made had to be made now, not in seconds but in a single moment, and he looked at Atlas, really looked this time. Not as a companion or a trained asset but as the one constant that had been right every step of the way, and Atlas met his gaze without hesitation, without doubt, and in that silent exchange the choice was made. Nathan reached for the mechanism beside the door, his hand steady despite everything, despite the storm still raging above, the armed men closing in behind them, and the unknown force already moving through the bunker, and he pressed it. The door didn't open immediately, but the system responded, a deep internal sequence beginning, locks disengaging one by one with heavy, echoing sounds that reverberated through the chamber, and the air changed again, colder, sharper, carrying something that hadn't been present before, something ancient, something controlled, and Marcus took a step back, his face pale now. His earlier composure completely gone because he understood what Nathan had just done, even if Nathan himself didn't fully grasp the consequences yet. If that opens, Marcus started, but the words died because there was no stopping it now. The mechanism had already begun, and behind them the final barrier gave way with a violent crash as the pursuing forces broke through, their lights flooding the corridor in harsh beams that cut into the chamber, voices shouting, weapons raising, and in that moment of collision between everything that had been building since the storm began, the door finally moved. Slowly. Heavily. Unstoppable. It opened just enough for darkness to spill out, not empty darkness but something deeper, something that felt alive in a way that didn't rely on movement or sound, and Atlas stepped forward without fear, without hesitation, his body crossing the threshold before Nathan could even process the decision, and Nathan followed because at this point there was nothing left to lose, nothing left to question, only forward, only truth. And as the door opened wider and the chamber filled with that impossible presence, one final realization settled over everything like the storm itself. The town hadn't tried to kill him because he was nothing. They had tried to kill him because he was the only one who would follow the dog. And now, whatever had been buried beneath that mountain for decades was no longer contained.